Hello, this is Professor Farley. I'm creating this video to help you think about some issues concerning academic tone as you're sitting down to write your papers. First issue is contractions. Please don't use contractions in your papers and in formal writing. A very easy mistake to make and a very easy one to correct as well. This is probably the most common and maybe the most difficult one to correct in a way. And you should not use first or second person pronouns in your papers. And this is mainly for reasons of clarity and also focus. Clarity, as you'll see in the first example here, you need to apply for scholarships. You is in the second person. And by replacing it with something like prospective students, you're actually telling us exactly who you're talking about. So it's adding a level of specificity to your work. And it's also making sure that, it's being accurate as well. For instance, since I'm not going to school anymore, thank God, I don't need to apply for scholarships. And when you're saying you, remember, you're talking to me. So in this case, that is not accurate as well. Likewise, you'll see in the second example here, we should support a candidate for mayor that takes into account the difficulties faced by CPS. Here, a more accurate thing would be Chicago voters. Okay, so the focus is when we talk about in first and second person, and we're creating a more conversational tone with our work. The focus can also be on more empathetic things. For instance, when I say we should support a candidate, I'm starting to relate to you in a way as if we're kind of in a group together, acting together. That sort of stuff. In my ideas of how this works has to do with my relationship with other people in this group and other things. When we're in the third person and we're just using descriptive factors like Chicago voters, for instance, the focus isn't on those group dynamics or who's included in that or whatever else. The focus is entirely on the ideas themselves. So in this case, the idea is that Chicago voters should be focusing on particular issues when it comes to a mayoral candidate. Okay? So third person, it's used for specific details and also to make sure the focus is always on the ideas themselves and not on any kind of personal interplay between the reader and the author. Etc. This is, again, a pretty simple one to use. You'll see in this example, there are many social media sites that offer that capability, Facebook, Snapchat, and etc. It just, again, it sort of leaves a sort of vague impression. Just being as specific as you can, Facebook, Snapchat, Instagram, and Tumblr, to name a few, again, is not only more descriptive, but also more formal. Cliches and idioms, these are sort of things that we would consider in the vernacular, or sort of like, again, conversational types of things that we would say that we understand the meaning of, but that aren't simply as direct. Words like nowadays, for instance, which are sort of more casual. Idioms like acting like a dog, for instance, which came up in a reading from a couple semesters ago. Obviously everyone, or not everyone, but generally speaking, people know that this means what this means, but this is just more directly saying it. A person has multiple sexual partners, right? Instead of this person is acting like a dog. So the idiom obviously is sort of figurative language. A person is not literally acting like a dog. It has a sort of implied meaning. Instead of making that implied meaning, come out and state exactly what you mean. Okay? More direct, more precise. Likewise, in the final one, the younger generation are glued to their phones. Obviously, they aren't literally glued to their phones. The younger generation spend significantly greater time on their cell phones than their elders. More specific, more direct. Tour guide, this is kind of a term that I use. I'm not sure if there's a proper term for this, but what I mean is that you don't necessarily have to guide your readers through your paper and sort of explain, my introduction is going to do this, my paper is going to state this. You just need to skip all of that language, take it all out, and just go straight into what you're trying to say. Likewise, after you have a quote or something else in your paper, you don't want to say, this statement says that, or this quote implies this, or anything else in which you are sort of focusing back on what you've just written. You just take all that language out and go straight into what you're saying. So you have your quote, and then you're making a point after it. Go straight into your point. You don't have to tell us about the quote itself. We just saw that it was a quote. Likewise, we understand that your introduction is trying to achieve a purpose, and when you go straight into that purpose, you don't have to tell us what that is. Questions and exclamations. Questions can be used. Just be very careful about how you're using them. Exclamation points, generally speaking, should not be found in academic writing. So if you do use a question, as I say, number 2, it's generally good to answer it. Sometimes it's a bit tricky because you ask a question and you move on, and the reader is still trying to answer it themselves. This is sort of human nature to do so. So that's why I say it's generally good to sort of come up with a direct answer to it immediately following your question if you do raise something like that. All right, I hope this has been helpful. I know that writing an academic tone is probably one of the most difficult things for overwhelming majority of 101 students. So it might take some practice to get some of these down, but I hope that you consult these rules as you move forward. All right, thanks.